From a quiet woodland ambush to a terrorizing sniper spree, these teens' shocking crimes landed them behind bars for life. From a quiet woodland ambush to a terrorizing sniper spree, these teens' shocking crimes landed them behind bars for life. In the pre-dawn hours of November 25, 1996, 17-year-old Roderick Justin "Rod" Farrell and accomplice Howard Scott Anderson drove from Kentucky to Eustis, Florida, claiming they would rescue a friend. Instead, they forced their way into the Wendorf home and bludgeoned 49-year-old Richard Wendorf with a crowbar, leaving a symbolic V burn on his chest, before attacking 47-year-old Naomi Queen, killing them both in a frenzy of violence. Over the next several days, Farrell led his self-styled vampire clan across 4 states, accompanied by 3 teenage girls. Their flight ended when they were lured to a Baton Rouge motel by one girl's grandmother, arrested without resistance, and promptly extradited back to Florida. Judge Jerry T. Lockett sentenced him to death in April 1998, making him the youngest inmate on Florida's death row, only for the Florida Supreme Court to commute his sentence to life without parole in November 2000. In the fall of 2002, the Washington, D.C. area was terrorized by nearly random sniper attacks that left 10 people dead and 3 wounded over 3 weeks. 17-year-old Lee Boyd Malvo, recruited and guided by 41-year-old Gulf War veteran John Allen Mohammed, perched in the back of a modified Chevrolet Caprice, firing on motorists at gas stations, parking lots, and roadsides from October 2nd to October 24th. Mohammed was captured at a Maryland rest stop when a state trooper spotted the leaking Caprice. Inside lay the rifle, ammunition, and disguises. At trial, Mohammed was convicted of 6 murders in Virginia and executed in 2009. Malvo, too young for the death penalty, pleaded guilty in Virginia, Maryland, and D.C., receiving multiple life without parole terms. A 2019 ruling in Maryland now makes him eligible for parole after 40 years. The Beltway sniper spree prompted unprecedented interstate cooperation among law enforcement agencies. The creation of rapid public alert systems at gas stations and on highways, and widespread public tip lines. It also sparked hard questions about how a vulnerable youth can be manipulated into violence, and how the justice system balances accountability with the potential for rehabilitation when offenders are themselves still children. On the sweltering afternoon of July 27, 2011, 17-year-old Tyler Hunt Hadley lured his parents, Mary Jo and Blake Hadley, into the master bedroom of their Port St. Lucie, Florida home and bludgeoned them to death, first with a claw hammer, then with a wine bottle. He then draped their bodies in plastic, wiped away fingerprints, cleaned himself in the shower, and staged the scene before slipping out to begin his evening. That night, under a sky still glowing pink, Tyler posted "House Unlocked, Come In" on social media, and threw a raucous party for dozens of classmates, complete with loud music, beer, and selfies, while his parents lay dead just upstairs. It wasn't until a dark stain crept down the stairs that a guest discovered the bodies. Panic spread, and Tyler finally confessed as police flooded the house. At his 2012 trial, Tyler pled guilty to 2 counts of second-degree murder. Citing his age and lack of prior offenses, the judge sentenced him to life in prison, with parole eligibility after 25 years, meaning he cannot seek release until 2343. On the evening of August 20th, 1989, brothers Lyle, 21, and Eric Menendez, 18, entered their opulent Beverly Hills home and fatally shot their parents, Jose and Kitty Menendez, with 12-gauge shotguns, then went on a lavish spending spree, buying luxury cars, Rolex watches, and exotic vacations. They initially blamed unknown intruders, but in March 1990, a therapist's tip about a secretly recorded confession led police to arrest Lyle outside the family home and Eric at LAX 3 days later. Their first trials in 1993 ended in mistrial. In a joint retrial from 1994 to 96, prosecutors portrayed them as cold-blooded and green, while the defense emphasized years of alleged physical and sexual abuse. Convicted of first-degree murder in 1996, both were sentenced to life without parole. In May 2025, After the emergence of a 1988 letter and new corroborating testimony, a judge resentenced them to 50 to life, making them eligible for parole hearings in August 2025, sparking fierce debate over whether childhood trauma should mitigate such brutal violence. The Menendez case, one of the first high-profile trials broadcast live, forever changed courtroom coverage and continues to prompt arguments about the line between punishment and rehabilitation when offenders claim histories of abuse. In the early evening of October 21, 2009, 15-year-old Alyssa Bustamante lured her 9-year-old neighbor, Elizabeth Olton, into a nearby woods with the promise of a surprise. Once alone, Alyssa strangled Elizabeth, slit her throat, stabbed her repeatedly, buried the body in a shallow grave, and then calmly returned home and even joined a neighborhood search before suspicion fell on her. Alyssa had endured a turbulent childhood, raised by grandparents after her mother's addiction and her father's incarceration, and exhibited warning signs by age 13, including a suicide attempt and online posts glorifying violence and self-harm. Police zeroed in on Alyssa after finding incriminating diary entries. Under questioning, she confessed, admitting the killing was driven by curiosity rather than any personal grievance against Elizabeth. In January 2012, she pleaded guilty to second-degree murder and armed criminal action. She received a life term with conditional release possible in 2024, later blocked by state law, plus a consecutive 30-year term, keeping her imprisoned until at least her mid-60s. The case spurred Missouri to tighten juvenile parole rules, inspired a $5 million wrongful death settlement for Elizabeth's estate, and prompted calls for better youth mental health and school community safeguards. In November 1998, 14-year-old Joshua Phillips invited his 8-year-old neighbor, Maddie Clifton, to play baseball in Jacksonville, Florida. After accidentally hitting her in the eye, Phillips panicked, dragged her into his bedroom, beat her with a bat, stabbed her, and hid her body beneath his bed. When Maddie failed to return home, her disappearance sparked a 6-day search. Her body was found on November 10th, and Phillips was arrested at school. Tried as an adult in 1999, he was convicted of first-degree murder and, barred from execution by his age, sentenced to life without parole. In 2017, following the Supreme Court's Miller v. Alabama ruling on juvenile life sentences, Phillips was granted a resentencing hearing and will be eligible for review in 2023. His case fueled national debate over how the justice system balances accountability, youth rehabilitation, and mental health intervention. In the late evening of February 18, 1988, 16-year-old David Francis Brom armed himself with an axe and brutally murdered his parents, Bernard, 43, and Paulette, 42, and his siblings, Diane, 13, and Richard, 11, in their Rochester, Minnesota, home. Neighbors grew concerned when the family failed to emerge the next morning and called police. Officers forced entry and discovered the gruesome scene upstairs. By February 19th, a classmate had reported that Brom confessed after convincing her to skip school. He was found near a payphone by the post office and taken into custody without incident. The city was stunned. Local schools and churches quickly organized vigils, and counselors were brought in to help children and families process the horror. Brom's case was moved from juvenile to adult court due to the crime's brutality. Despite an insanity plea under Minnesota's M. Nagan rules, he was convicted of 4 counts of first-degree murder on October 16, 1989, and received 3 consecutive life terms, plus 52.5 years before he becomes eligible for parole. The murders prompted urgent discussions in Rochester about mental health intervention and juvenile justice. The community remains vigilant about warning signs, threatening remarks, mood swings, or family turmoil. And the case continues to influence debates over how best to prevent such tragedies. On the afternoon of February 14, 2018, 19-year-old Nicholas Cruz arrived at Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School in Parkland, Florida, carrying a semi-automatic AR-15 rifle and multiple magazines. At 2:19 p.m., he entered Building 12 and, over a 6-minute rampage, killed 17 students and staff and wounded 18 others before discarding his weapon and blending in with fleeing classmates. He was arrested roughly an hour later in nearby Coral Springs. Emergency responders and school staff worked frantically to tend the wounded and secure the campus. The school went into lockdown. Counselors were brought in to support students and families, and community vigils sprang up as news of the massacre spread. Cruz was charged with 17 counts of premeditated murder and 17 counts of attempted murder. In October 2021, he pleaded guilty, and after a penalty trial in 2022, a jury found him death-eligible but deadlocked. In November 2022, Judge Elizabeth Scheer instead sentenced him to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The shooting spurred Florida's Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School Public Safety Act, raising the rifle purchase age to 21, banning bump stocks, creating red flag orders and an Office of Safe Schools, and helped ignite the national March for Our Lives movement. It remains a stark reminder of the need for vigilance, threat reporting, and comprehensive support to protect students from senseless violence. In the early hours of June 7, 1992, 12-year-old Sharon Louise Carr, later nicknamed the Devil's Daughter, lurched from hiding and randomly selected 18-year-old Katie Ratcliffe as she walked home in Camberley, Surrey. Carr stabbed Ratcliffe 32 times with a 6.5-inch kitchen knife, mutilating her torso and genitals, then dragged the body to a nearby cemetery wall and abandoned it. Despite the savage nature of the crime, investigators initially suspected an adult male, and the case went cold. 2 years later, on June 7, 1994, Carr stabbed a 13-year-old classmate at Collingwood College, puncturing her lung. Her chilling boasts in private diaries, detailing mutilations only the killer could know, finally led police to her. In May 1996, Carr was formally charged with Ratcliffe's murder. At Winchester Crown Court, on March 25, 1997, a unanimous jury found her guilty, making her Britain's youngest female murderer. Justice Baker sentenced her to life at Her Majesty's pleasure, with a minimum tariff of 14 years. Carr remains held under restricted status in high-security psychiatric and young offenders institutions, repeatedly denied parole, most recently in 2022, amid ongoing violent behavior and expressed intent to kill. Her case continues to fuel calls for early mental health intervention for at-risk youth, tighter oversight in secure units, and debates over life detention for child offenders. In April 2014, a shocking act of violence ripped through the calm of a Leeds classroom. On the morning of April 28th, 15-year-old William "Will" Cornick walked into his Spanish lesson at Corpus Christi Catholic College, pulled a long kitchen knife from his bag, and stabbed his teacher, 61-year-old Anne Maguire, 7 times in the back and neck. The attack happened in front of about 30 stunned pupils, and Cornick calmly returned to his seat afterward, telling a friend, "Good times." Maguire died shortly after. Her life ended while doing the job she loved. Emergency crews arrived within minutes, but despite frantic efforts by her assistant and paramedics, Maguire succumbed to her wounds. The school went into lockdown. Grief counselors were brought in, and local residents laid flowers outside the college as news spread. Cornick was arrested at the scene, and later held at Wetherby Young Offenders Institution, before being moved to a high-security prison on safety grounds. At Leeds Crown Court in November 2014, he pleaded guilty to murder. The judge described his lack of remorse as chilling and imposed a life sentence with a minimum term of 20 years. The murder of Anne Maguire prompted nationwide reforms in school security, threat assessment, and mental health support for pupils, and stands as a tragic reminder that vigilance, open communication, and early intervention are vital in preventing such senseless violence.